Now what if we're given an equation to start with, and I say, make a sketch of the graph of this equation and don't use your calculator. Could you interpret the four numbers that are in the equation and draw a graph of this? So let's start by analyzing the two numbers on the outside. 3 is going to be our sinusoidal axis and 5 is the amplitude. So I'm going to write here sinusoidal axis equals 3 amplitude equals 5. Now that's going to give me 3 key points on the y-axis because I know here that y equals 3 is the sinusoidal axis, and then I can also find my high point because the high point is just the sinusoidal axis plus the amplitude, and the low point is the sinusoidal axis minus the amplitude, which gives me -2. So I'm going to have 3 key points, sinusoidal axis, high point, and low point, on the y-axis. Now let's look at what happens on the x-axis. On the x-axis, we're dealing with a starting point of -2 and a period that we find with pi over 7.5. We need to change that to 2 pi. This is half the period, remember? So if we have pi over 7.5 is the same as 2 pi over 2 times 7.5, which is 15. So the period equals 15. We start equals -2. That's the phase displacement. Adding 2 inside the function shifts the graph to the left 2. Now, it's good to know where the graph ends. Okay, this is the starting point of the cycle. Where's the ending point? Well, if the cycle is 15 units long and it starts at -2, it's going to end at 13. So we're going to say ends at -2 plus 15, which is 13. So we have 2 of our 5 key points for the x-axis. We don't know what the other 3 are yet, but we're going to have to figure that out. So all of this pertains to x, and this is all x stuff right here, and all of this pertains to y. So I always want to do this first before I start drawing anything, before I even make any axes. A lot of people like to start out and saying, here are my x and y axis, but you have no idea what you're going to need for the x and y axis until you do this. So I know that my low point is -2 and my high point is 8 on the y-axis. My low point is -2 and my high point is 13 on the x-axis. So I need to allow for that. So, and I also need to leave a little space at the bottom for the sake of notes. So I'm going to kind of go like this. There's my y-axis. Here's my x-axis. So I'm going to go down to -2. And then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so kind of squished a little bit here. So there's 8. And then here is 3. Okay, so those are my 3 key points on the y-axis. I know this high, middle, and low. This is the sinusoidal axis, so I'm going to dot in the sinusoidal axis here. Now sometimes it's also helpful to kind of dot in your low and your high values too. So here's the low and the high points where my cycle is, what my cycle might hit. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take all that thing and just scoot it down just a wee bit. I know you can't do that, but I don't want to cover up my equation there. All right, so this kind of forms a framework for the graph in the y direction. Now I need to also do the x direction. So in the x direction, I have -2 as one of my values, and then I'm going to go up to 13. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now I'm going ahead and making a tick mark for every number, but later on we'll see that we don't necessarily need to do that, but just for right now, for the first time, it's kind of helpful to see that. Now I need to locate the other key points on the x-axis. I know the period is 15, and the other points are going to be evenly spaced. So what I need to do is think about here. From here to here is 15. That's the period. So what would be half of the period? Well, half of the period would be dividing this into 2 increments of 7.5. So 7.5. So I know from -2 to the middle point is going to be 7.5 units. So let me mark that off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. So this is going to be the point 5.5. It's -2 plus 7.5. Now I need to find the point that's halfway in between -2 and 5.5 and 5.5 and 13. So I know, now I'm going to take 7.5 and divide it in half. And these numbers get a little messy. I apologize for that for your first example. But if I divide 7.5 in half, I get 3.75 and 3.75. And then if I did that again, it's not perfectly drawn here, I get 3.75 and 3.75. Half of 7 is 3.75, which means all of my key points are going to be 3.75 units apart. So if I take -2 and add 1, 2, 3.75, this puts me at 1.75. So this is 1.75. And then if I take 5.5 and add 3.75, I get 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, plus 0.75 would end up being 9.25. Like I said, I won't try to give you examples that don't always have such messy numbers. But it's important that those points are labeled. And I will specifically be looking for you to label those 5 key points. They should be equally spaced. The beginning to the end should equal the period. Okay. Now, once I have my key points, it's really easy to draw the graph. First, I do have to recognize this is a cosine graph. So a cosine graph is going to start high, end high, have its middle point down low. So let's put those 3 points in. The high point is at -2, 8. -2 is the starting x position. 8 is the highest that the graph can go. Its ending point is going to be at 13, 8. Ending point at the highest it can go. The middle value is going to be at 5.5, -2, because, and I think I'm going to put these in different color just to make them stand out a little more, because I have lots of red dots. Okay, so there's those are the first 3 key points. Now I have also, here's my sinusoidal axis, I'm going to have 2 points on the sinusoidal axis too, so it kind of goes like that. So on the sinusoidal axis, that's where at halfway between -2 and 5.5, I'm going to be on the sinusoidal axis. So x is 1.75 and y is 3. Halfway between 5.5 and 13 at 9.25, I'm also going to be on the sinusoidal axis. So 9.253 is another point. And now I'm ready to draw my concave down section that's above the sinusoidal axis and my concave up section that is below the sinusoidal axis. There we go. So there is one curve of my sine cycle. Now, there is a way to check this on the calculator. So the next video will explain that a little better.